Alright, here we are with another video showcasing some military items found at recent estate sales and estate auctions. So let's take a look at what we've recently found. This first item here, if you're a Vietnam collector, you may recognize this is the Lightweight Rucksack. There were numerous different rucksacks, backpacks that different troops wore in Vietnam, but probably the Lightweight Rucksack was probably the most common. Now, the Lightweight Rucksack, they first started testing them in 1962 with different Special Forces units, and by 1964 they made the first production model. This would be one of the first production models. And the way that we can tell, just looking at the frame, is if we look here, we'll see that it's welded rather than riveted. Now, the lightweight rucksacks that were made between 1965 and 1971 were all riveted. And the reason why is that when they produced this version, got it out to a larger number of troops, they got a bunch of complaints from troops saying it's breaking where the welds are. So they decided to redesign it for the 1965 version and started riveting frames. So we know that the frame is from the first production model in 1964, but that doesn't necessarily mean that the lightweight rucksack that's attached to the frame is from the 1964 version. To figure that out, we'd have to look in here, and on the 1965 version all the way up to 1971, you'll usually find the contract information printed right below where it says instructions inside, and if you don't find it there, sometimes you will find it actually printed on the inside of this where we find the instructions. But we don't see any contract information here. We don't see it inside of this pouch where the instructions are. Instead, for the 1964 version, you will find the information printed right here, and we see it says DSA 1, and then we see a 64 for the 64 being the contract year. And we know that when it got up to 1966, they just started doing a DSA 100, and they were not designating the year necessarily anymore. Now, another way you can tell, if for some reason that was worn off and you couldn't read that, and you wanted to know if this was a rucksack from 64, would be to look at this cinching here. It's kind of a whitish, opaque. And on the 1965 to 1971 version, you'll find that this is brown. So you see it and it's a color like that and it's not brown, that's a good chance of it being a 1964 version. So it's a little bit rarer, obviously being only produced for, I believe, for 1 year versus the 65 to 71 being 6 years of production. So there's just a few little details on how you can tell if you've got an earlier production lightweight rucksack. And the next item here, this came from the same gentleman this lightweight rucksack came from. It's just your standard map case. The information, manufacturer's date on the back, not really able to read it, so I don't know, it could have been a World War II date, or it's something he used in Vietnam, so it could have been Vietnam dated. And we see here we've got a Vietnam era Bipod pouch. And we see on the back there, it's got a DSA 67 for a 1967 contract date. And next we see these two mag pouches. These are some new old stock ones. And we see on the back they have their contract information, and you can kind of see, looking at the DSA dates from the lightweight rucksack to the bipod, and we see like this just DSA 100, and we don't see a year designated like the Lightweight Rucksack said 64. And we also don't see, like the Bipod, where it said actually designated a 67 in there. We just see a DSA 100 and dash and 4. So this is a 1966 contract. And these were to hold magazines for grease guns. So this next item here is your standard Vietnam era boonie hat. Always want to be on the lookout for larger sizes in these. There's a ton of these out there that are new old stock that are like size 6 5/8, 6 1/2, and I'm guessing because nobody could wear them. But once you start getting sizes that are over a 7, they start becoming a little more desirable for collectors and a little bit rarer. So this one's a size 7, kind of right in the middle there. And this came from the same gentleman that the boonie hat came from. It's just your standard ripstop jungle shirt, but it does have a couple of interesting features to it. We see the U.S. Air Force and the name tapes, and we see that they've got a little bit of almost like a purplish tint to the thread, and that's the way that the name tags and branch tapes, that's the way they'll start to look. If they're tapes that were made over in Southeast Asia, the dyes in the thread start fading and start getting a little bit purplish looking. And we see that, which I thought was a little unusual, was that with him being in the Air Force, that he was in the 1st Aviation Brigade, which was the Army unit. But we see the same way with the thread on the edge of it, where it's kind of getting a little bit of that kind of purplish, a little silver in it. And so this would be a patch that was made over in Southeast Asia versus being a US made patch. So let's see, what do we got next here? This is from that same gentleman. This was his M65 field coat. He had taken his name and some of his patches off of there, but looks like he wore this one very little. There's always a good market for these M65 field coats if they're in good shape, because a lot of people like to wear them, vintage clothing people and fashion. And this was from that same gentleman again. This was his jacket from the Air Force Academy out in Colorado Springs. I believe he was at the Air Force Academy from 1958 to 1962. And if we look on in the pocket here, we can actually see the manufacturer's tag, and we see down towards the bottom it does have a February of 1959 contract date. Now this next item here is kind of a, sometimes you'll go to a sale and people say, well, that's from World War II. That's worth a bunch of money, just because they think it's really old and so it's got to be worth a bunch. And these here are some cold weather insulated air crew pants, and they don't have a lot of value for collectors. Certainly the jackets are worth a lot more. People can wear the jackets, they're a little easier to display. These big bulky pants, not so much. But it's kind of hard to see, but you can just start to see the stencil there, and sometimes it's hard to see, but they're still worth $30 or $40 maybe. And this last item, this might have been one of the better finds over the last few weeks. When I saw a picture of these in the auction, I really wasn't sure what kind of pants they were, especially with these zippers on here. I hadn't seen pants like this with zippers on them. Now, if you're a World War II collector, you may be saying, well, I know exactly what those are, but I'm not really that familiar with a lot of the World War II uniforms. So when I saw these, at first I thought, maybe there's something that's like some European military thing. And it wasn't until I started looking at them a little more that I thought, well, I guess maybe they are U.S. And these were actually for the mountain troops, such as the 10th Mountain Division. And these were classified as a Type 2 version. The Type 1 version, I believe, basically looked the same as these. They were just made out of a wool material instead. And if we look on the inside, we'll see the size information stamped in it, still nice and legible. And you may look around and you say, if you're like me and you're not real familiar with World War II items, sometimes you say, well, where's the other tag? Where's the tag that would tell the date of manufacture? And you usually find that if you flip over the pocket, and there it is. And we see, sure enough, mountain trousers. And we see that it has a pattern date, and a pattern date, September 11th, 1942. And we see the contract date, November 5th, 1942. So these pants are actually, they're over 80 years old. And so these are certainly something that seems to be becoming more and more desirable. There's several companies that make reproductions. I saw a company making reproductions of these, and they wanted $250 for reproductions. So there are certainly nice, high quality pants. And another aspect on them, apparently quite often you'll find these that have just been cut off, and so to find those with an intact looks a little bit rare. But sometimes you'll see people selling these for up to $400 or $500 for a pair of pants like this. So certainly something to be on the lookout for at estate sales and garage sales. And that's about going to wrap it up. Hope you've enjoyed seeing some of these recent finds. Maybe you've helped you to be able to identify things a little better. Any comments on the items? Maybe you know a little more about them than I do. That's very probable. If you do, feel free to comment below, and please subscribe and like the video so you'll be informed when future videos are uploaded. Thanks for watching.